So, how's it going, everybody? I'm here with my buddy Grant, and today we are talking about Henry Cavill, who apparently is going to start a Warhammer 40K cinematic universe. If you didn't know, he recently exited the Witcher series due to creative differences and was let go as Superman due to new leadership at DC. So unfortunately, he's 0 for 2 when it comes to geek franchises and cinematic universes. But I am actually rooting for Henry Cavill. He is one of my favorite actors due to the fact that he seems to be passionate about these hobbies and these franchises. And if rumors are to be trusted regarding his exit from the Witcher series, he left due to them not wanting to follow the source material as much, which tells me that he has some integrity as an actor when it comes to, again, these hobbies, these franchises that he actually cares a lot about. And so here I have my buddy Grant, who is going to be this channel's Warhammer 40K consultant.
Yeah.
Days nothing, but so yeah. What? Actually, real quick, I'm going to read off. Henry Cavill's
his Twitter post.
Yeah, his
or Instagram.
Henry Cavill a couple days ago, which strange timing because he also a couple days before that announced that he was no longer going to be Superman. But he posts on Instagram saying, "For 30 years, I have dreamt of seeing a Warhammer universe in live action. Now, after 22 years of experience in this industry, I finally feel that I have the skill set and experience to guide a Warhammer cinematic universe into life. Partnering with Natalie Viscuso, I think is how you pronounce her name, at Vertigo, has been a blessing beyond words. Without her, we might not have found the perfect home at Amazon. Having a home like Amazon will give us the freedom to be true to the massive scope of Warhammer. To all of you Warhammer fans out there, I promise to respect this IP that we love. I promise to bring you something familiar, and I endeavor to bring you something fantastic that is, as of yet, unseen. Our first steps are to find our filmmaker, creator, writer. Watch this space, my friends." And then would you like to read that last line, since you're probably...
For the Emperor, as a good space marine would say.
So why don't you go ahead and give us like a quick summary about 40K, because disclaimer for my viewers, I have little to no knowledge of any part of the Warhammer franchise. I've tried to dip into the lore a little bit a few times here and there, though even though I have no interest, honestly, in the tabletop game. But yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, so Warhammer 40K or 40,000 is a universe kind of originally built around a tabletop game. So when I say tabletop game, I mean, like, think of little models that you push around on a table with like dice and a ruler, and they shoot at each other and stuff. And it's basically like playing Army Men, but with like fantasy and sci-fi combined. The franchise has been around for a while. Originally, it started out as just like a fantasy, just called Warhammer Fantasy. And from there, they made a game a little bit later called Warhammer 40K. And it was kind of like a fantasy in space when it first came out. So it was, these space marines, quotation marks, or people in like armor with guns. So they look like knights, but in space with guns fighting like orcs. And, there's like even like an elf race called the Eldar. And there's even like demons and stuff. So the original idea is just kind of like fantasy sci-fi. And from there, it built into this very robust, and when I mean robust, I mean very, very large universe of many, many, many writers that has been expanded over the course of like 30 years. And the general gist of the 40K universe is humanity has basically gone out and conquered the stars many thousands of years ago due to a great rebellion called the Horus Heresy. They now have basically stagnated for like 10,000 years, and they've turned to hyper-religious zealot-like foundations. Literally, they're controlled by a group called the Ecclesiarchy, who will input many different kind of mandates, and they literally force their people, the humankind, to worship their leader, who they call the Emperor, who is at this point in the 40K universe basically a corpse on a throne, but he is this crazy, powerful psychic entity. He literally like helps them travel through space. He has the ability to like almost like gift people with protection and stuff. But he's been dead for like 10,000 years, or in that like suspended death state, due to that rebellion earlier on that I was talking about. So the entire Imperium is this like extremely fascist kind of satire, like to the extreme, and everything in the setting of the like universe is very gothic. It's very dark. Everything's very grim. They literally call it grim dark setting, which might seem like not that fun, but it creates a lot of very interesting stories, very like heartfelt stories, due to like people overcoming these great odds of just cosmic, from everything from like literal cosmic horrors of like demons and like demon gods called the chaos gods, which are constantly trying to destroy the universe, to like orcs who just like killing things, who like roam the galaxy in gigantic meteors that are just covered in trash and junk that they collect. They have elves that are like an ancient race that's kind of like past their period of prominence, and they are like a dying race as well, but they have like crazy technology. So like they even have a anime like Japanese kind of style army called the Tau, that they have in the game as well. So there's something for everybody, and the idea is that there's just constantly war. The Empire is extremely xenophobic, and everyone else kind of is either a monster. And there's Tyranids, which are bug creatures. In fact, the latest game that's coming out, Space Marine 2, is going to be a AAA title. It looks fantastic. If you can get some shots of that eventually. But it is against Tyranids. And Tyranids are like, if you ever played StarCraft, they're like the Zerg. They're bug-like. I wouldn't say bug-like, but they're basically like organic monsters that consume all life and then repurpose it to create more bio monsters. And they literally float through space in gigantic bio ships of like massive organic gloop. But they're very scary because they literally absorb entire planets and stuff. So there's a lot in the 40K universe. Like I said, robust, very, very, very robust universe and lots of lore. And so when it comes to creating a story in it, there's literally anything you could go about any path. You don't have to follow anybody else's story. There is so much going on, and the scope of this universe is like a galaxy, like large environment, right? So everything's on a higher scale. It isn't like planet one person in a city. Like most things going on is like entire systems of planets getting destroyed by said fleet of enemies and stuff. So the stories are infinite that you can create. And so I think it's very hard to piss off the fans. I mean, everyone always has. There's always a critic, but if you're not trying to just recreate something else that's already been made, it's very hard not to just make something that could happen in the 40K universe, because it's so big, you could literally create anything you really thought of, as long as you're sticking to that like dark, grim, dark feeling, and everything's morbid and everything sucks.
So kind of going off of what you said about, excuse me, different stories they can tell and stuff. What are your first impressions on kind of Henry Cavill's mission statement, if you could call it that?
Oh God, Henry Cavill's the poster boy of 40K. He is, the best way to put it is, like, there has been many people who've played Warhammer in the past. A good example is like Robin Williams was actually a Warhammer player. A lot of stars and a lot of nerds out there have kept it hidden for many years, because it's if you think you're nerdy for playing D&D or reading a comic book, maybe not D&D. D&D is pretty nerdy, but like reading a comic book or playing video games, wait until you start pushing models on a table, around and rolling dice and being like, oh, my guy shoots your guy, poo-poo, which I make fun of it, but I love the game. I play the game like as much as I can. And it's a hobby of not just playing a game. It's also like painting models and stuff. But again, he's kind of the poster boy. He's come out and talked about how much he likes 40K, how much he himself has a army. He plays the Adeptus Custodes, which are like the guardians of the Emperor. They're like super humans, if that's a thing, because Space Marines are superhuman. They're like a step above that. But he plays when he can. Obviously, he talks about the fact that he doesn't get a lot of time. But even during COVID, he had a post of him painting one of his models' heads. And just having someone so prolific, someone who literally like played the role of like the embodiment of, I wouldn't say masculinity specifically, but like strong, super powered human, right? Like a Superman is hard to walk away from as an ideal and as a character, and play that character without like in some way being not associated with, nerdy games. I mean, The Witcher, he plays a very gruff and very what's the way to put it? Like anti-hero. So he's done things that are very different and I mean, he's even been, a spy and stuff. And Witcher's a special case, because Witcher is a very nerdy, when you really get down to it, it's a fantasy show. But again, plays characters that are like not the nerd, not the weakling in the back, right? So it's nice to see someone that most women find attractive, right? Someone who's not like the quintessential like stinky nerd in the back corner who nobody likes and talks too much about his hobby. So it's good to have a poster boy who really kind of shows that there's more to nerds and like people who enjoy this hobby. There's more than just people sitting behind a desk on the computer playing Warcraft. The general stereotypes. But yeah, and he has talked about how much he loves it, and I believe him, especially when it comes to the fact that like when he was on The Witcher and and they're falling out over his wanting to follow the source material more.
Yeah.
Good luck, Witcher show, on being good without Henry Cavill. After he did such a good job, he embodied Geralt very well. He did a fantastic job. The writing was great too. So it's not like he's the only bit, but studios will be studios. They're going to always want to change things up, and I'm fine with people changing things. I just wonder how much they wanted to change it that Henry Cavill would feel the need to argue with them, right? Because most people have to you have to change you always have to change it up a little bit, because it just doesn't translate as well as you think it will to motion picture. But in this case, the 40K universe, you have so many options. You could do so many things. So yeah, I'm excited. I hope he plays a character. I hope he finds a good writer. Some of my favorite writers for 40K. I hope he turns to maybe some of them because, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of. Oh, this is why I suck at names. But anyways, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what he chooses to do.
Whoever those writers are, do you think writing what I assume are books would translate well to writing a show or a movie?
Not always. Writing a book is very different than writing scenes and dialogue that fits like an actual screen. If you just put dialogue straight from a book, it feels weird. And so sometimes you got to change that up, but I don't think they need to worry about that as much. Guy Haley, by the way, is the author that I really, really like. There's also Dan Abnett, but Guy Haley writes some fantastic Warhammer 40K novels. In fact, the picture of Gilliman in the background is next to Henry Cavill. He does a bunch of books with him in it. Gilliman's a character from the 40K universe. But yeah, I think one of the things they could do many things. They could do something in the 40K universe. They could do something in the 30K universe, which is the Horus Heresy, which has a huge following and a ton of books, and it's kind of like the setup for why everything is the way it is in 40K. But I don't know. I could see him playing. I love it because they keep putting like you put up the picture of him as the Emperor.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense too. Like if you're gonna put the effort into creating this universe, like why not cast yourself as the Emperor?
Well, the sad part is the Emperor, like I said, is a corpse.
Well, if he plays if they do the 30K version, like you said, then he could play the Emperor for entire seasons of a show or whatever it would be.
The problem with the Emperor is he's mainly, and it's actually a big part of the books, is he's very absent from the like what's going on. He literally retreats back to like Earth, like because they go on this great crusade to reconquer planets that originally had been part of the human empire. There was a dark age, things went bad, humanity lost its empire, and then they went to like a technological dark age. He brings them out of that and like starts conquering all these planets that had been conquered a long time ago. But he sends out these people during the Great Crusade, and eventually he goes back to his planet and leaves them to keep conquering and like reuniting the humanity with its lost like cousins / worlds that they conquered.
Well, see, if they start off doing his like his initial rise, then Henry Cavill could have like a semi-prominent role for 2 or 3 seasons. And then as he gets older and he wants to have like less direct involvement, and maybe he doesn't want to get like super jacked for the role like he did with Superman and Geralt, then that's when they start phasing into like the time period where he is basically just sitting on the throne.
Yeah, so you could The main thing is the Emperor, as cool as he is and exciting as he is a boring character because he's just like crazy, omnipotent, psychic, almost. I mean, he's literally worshipped as a god, and he's not a god, but he is on par with the power of like something. Because I say psychic, and what I mean by that for people who don't understand, it's psychic powers in this universe are on par with magic. They are, like mentally created things, but like people literally create like fire and stuff and like do everything from like seeing the future to creating portals and stuff. So psychic is like willing non-reality things into reality power. And he is a absolute like god when it comes to that. And it's the reason why things go bad eventually is because he doesn't want people to worship him, and people start worshiping him. There's a whole thing for why like religion is bad in the universe because chaos gods exist, and they primarily get their power from people worshiping them and or doing the things of excess or violence, right? There's 4 main chaos gods. There's Nurgle, Khorne, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh, and each one has like an aspect of the human psyche or like living psyche, because it's all races, that it's like all their negatives, everything bad. So if you've ever seen, in a way to describe, and I haven't described this yet, like for the demons and the cosmic horror stuff, and this is a very big part of 40K, it's why it's like one of the main enemies is chaos. There's this thing called the warp, and the warp, if you've ever seen Event Horizon, and it's actually I think where they originally got their idea for the warp. I can't remember if that's the case or if like it's just kind of like you can tell because it came out in the 80s, but when they go when the ship goes like through slip space or what it does, it literally goes to like another dimension that's like hell. The warp is like that. It's a dimension that exists like a layer on top of reality that you can draw power from. It can be literally opened and demons come out of it, right? It's like a hellscape of just like all the things and all the bad things that humanity and other races kind of put out in the world. So it's funny because like war and stuff is the thing that happens constantly. And because people war, because people hate, because people have excess, because people plan and scheme, they literally cause a like psychic reflection in the warp of their behaviors and the things that they are. And that's what the warp is. But it takes on a life of its own pretty much because of it. And the Chaos Gods are constantly trying to invade and kill and take over and or corrupt humanity and other races, mainly, especially humanity, because the Emperor knew they existed. Most people don't know they exist for a long time. Here recently, people know that things exist like that because there's like a literal massive rift in space that kind of makes it hard to ignore. But yeah, they could do something in the 30K with the Emperor. I think that if he would do any role, I would love to see him as Horus himself, the betrayer, the person who causes the great betrayal, Horus. Because the fall of Horus is a very interesting story. Or if you go to the 40K universe, he could be anyone from Dante, who is a leader of one of the Space Marine people. I think he would be a good chapter master or someone like that. He could be Gilliman, who is like the leader of the Imperium at the moment. I don't know. He could be Eisenhorn, though that's not like the coolest role, in my opinion, for him. Eisenhorn is a human inquisitor, and inquisitors are like what they sound like for most things. Usually people go around and enforce the will of the ecclesiarchy. But in this case, Eisenhorn is like a detective story, and there's many books with him. It's very like going in and finding out secrets, and he's like a detective, and it's very noir. So that's really loved by a lot of people. He could do Eisenhorn.
What if he took on a role that you would never expect, like a random orc lieutenant or something?
I would love it. I mean, I wouldn't care. I would be happy for the universe being on a cinematic scale, right? The main thing I think they need to worry about is CGI is something that I'm sure is going to have to be most of the time. I just hope they use more props than they try. But
what if they did a CGI animation style in the same style they do with the like cinematics for like Space Marine and Space Marine 2, or like the cinematics that you see fans make, or like the Astartes and or like if you saw the Love, Death, Robots series on Netflix, that anthology where they have like incredibly realistic CGI styles in there, like would that be satisfying to you as a fan?
Well, they already
entire
have
series like that.
Well, the thing is we already have animations. They even have Warhammer Plus, which is Games Workshop, who, by the way, Games Workshop's the one who owns and created 40K. They have a app streaming service that has animations on it, and they've been slowly building it over the last couple of years, which has some really good stuff on it. And they've been doing a couple of the shows are CGI. They even have an anthology like Animatrix / I don't know if you ever watched the Animatrix, but Love, Death, and Robots is a copy of that style originally from Animatrix, which is like different authors of different artwork or different CGI types or different animations, all creating stories for like mini episodes over, a course of like 6 to 10 episodes. But they've already done that. So when I say live action, I want to see like full live action. I think Space Marines are hard to do. So I'm really, what's the way to put it? I'm hesitant to see what they come up with. I think that they would have to take a lot of time. I feel like they should use more practical props. Because if you just put it mostly in CGI, and this is why I say this, because most of their stuff is going to be grim dark, which means everything's going to be blackish and dark, and there's going to be probably like wet or just that constant like nighttime look. And
so like Zack Snyder films.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Like that, that kind of thing. But that also like sometimes is very like, if you have a bunch of CGI in that, it's very obvious because everything looks like a shiny like glimmer off of every single surface. So I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm excited to see what they do. Space Marines are harder to do because they're all in massive armor. They're all way taller than everybody else. You have crazy like robots and stuff that you have to CGI in. There's tanks. All the battles will be on epic proportions, but you can always do a smaller story. I mean, that's not impossible.
I don't see Henry Cavill taking over for the cinematic universe and not doing large scale battles.
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that they would take let's show what the 40K universe is like mainly about, which is big battles, big like cosmic horror fighting, whole planets getting raised. I mean, that's the stuff that happens constantly. And
I could picture him taking over as director, and when he's directing the actors, he's basically showing them on his board, the little armies and stuff going around. He's like, okay, I want you guys to do this, and I want you guys to do this.
Well, the good thing is there's, if anyone's interested, right, and you don't know a lot about 40K, just look up some of the games. There's Dawn of War, which is a computer game RTS. Space Marine for Xbox, which was a very good game. It was like a third-person hack and slash shoot 'em up, fighting orcs. Here recently, Dark Tide came out, which is fantastic.
Is that? I thought about getting that, even though I don't know. Like I said, I don't know anything about or much about 40K.
Oh, it's good.
That'd be worth it.
It's a 4-player co-op with but you play as just regular humans, kind of like having to fight these very like cosmic horror zombie-esque. So like Nurgle is one of the gods, and all the Nurgle stuff is like gross pestilence and like nasty pus and acid and stuff like that. Stuff you would see from like a garden of evil kind of thing. But that game, like you fight hordes of like zombie-like creatures. You fight chaos, like corrupted humans mainly. But it's a good experience. You can play 4 players. They have like 4 classes and stuff, and it gives you like that true feeling of what it's like to be just a lonely human in this like universe. Because usually a single human is no match for 99% of the things out there. But in the video game, obviously, you get to feel a little stronger than that. But some of the enemies you fight are just what is basically like a normal enemy for the tabletop. What you would see on a tabletop and be like, oh, that's that one little like weakling thing that doesn't have that great of stats. But in the game, you're fighting it as like just a lowly human being, and that thing is massive and a boss, right? So it gives you the feeling of dread. It's very dark. You fight in the Underhive, like in hive cities are a big thing in 40K. And if you don't know what I mean by that, just think of like cities that literally sprawl entire like parts of planets. And their main job is to like manufacture war, like just munitions, tanks, some special thing that needs to be shipped out to the rest of the universe, right? But any of the games are a good starting point. If you're ever interested in tabletop, just go down to your local comic store. Maybe they'll have some Games Workshop stuff. Your hobby stores usually have some kind of model. You can always watch YouTube. YouTube has tons of like people playing the game. Speaking of the Emperor, that's when the Emperor fights Horus after Horus defeats Sanguinius, one of the Primarchs. So another little lore thing. There's supposed to be 20, but 2 of them are missing. Primarchs that are like the closest thing to demigods as you can imagine. They're not as powerful as the Emperor, but they're basically like his genetic sons. He literally creates them, but they're like his sons. And the one who betrays him is one of his son, Horus. And he takes like half of the Primarchs with him. And the Primarchs lead the Space Marine legions. So each Primarch has like an entire legion of superhuman soldiers that follow behind them and have their genetic code. So Space Marines, literally, when they go from human to Space Marine, they are infused with part of the genetic code of their Primarch. But that's why, like, if you ever see like a big human compared to the already big humans, those are Primarchs. They're like demigod heroes of legend, basically. And some are evil and now demonically possessed and are really cool looking and evil. But,
kind of speaking about the like the sharing of genes from the Primarchs to their soldiers. How would you feel if in the cinematic universe they made it so that women could be I
don't think
what is the
Space Marines?
Yeah, Space Marines. What the hell? I couldn't
think there's any reason not to. The reason being is they even had female Space Marines originally a long time ago. They made models for it. And the reason why they didn't do it or continue it is just because the cells. It just didn't sell as much. But that's their excuse now. And it's many years later. They could have retconned. They've retconned a million things. And I know this is, for anyone who is a 40K fan, what I'm talking about is heresy to some people, and other people just don't care. And they're like, why does it matter? The reason being is they're so far removed from being a human that I say sons, but they're not like genetically, they're so different from a human, it doesn't matter. Like when you use science to literally create like godlike beings, it doesn't matter what their gender is. And literally, Space Marines can't procreate. Like it's not like they're just souped up men. They're literally like enhanced, taking a human and then like changing their physiology to be something that they are not. They're not just slightly enhanced humans. They are literally like something completely different. So it really doesn't matter. And some people just hate the idea of it because it destroys their mental image of what a Space Marine is. But again, I could care less. I think it'd be great. There's plenty of women out there who like playing Space Marines, and there's even people who have commissioned / created female Space Marine armies for their own. I know some guys have done it. I know some women who've done it. And it just looks cool. And they fixed what I would call this mistake in Age of Sigmar, which is their fantasy version of the game of Warhammer. They have a race called the Stormcast, which are basically like God-infused, like lightning-infused superhuman soldiers. And they basically are just like, there's both men and women in it. And they just, when they first made the models, they just had both. And they just didn't create dumb reasons for why and why it couldn't be. Some people also speculate that 2 of the Primarchs that went missing could be female. That's another thing that they could do. Because there are 2 redacted Primarchs that they have not created the lore, but they've also like made in the lore be like, these 2 Primarchs did something so terrible that even before the Horus Heresy, they were eradicated from the history books.
So they weren't the ones that were struck from the history for joining the Chaos Gods?
No. So the ones that were struck from that, they're just called like Hereticus. It's like something Hereticus. But those other 2 literally are like completely wiped. And the other like Primarch and the Legions and stuff, people still know what they are, but the other 2 are like completely gone and eradicated. And I know they hold that in their back pocket for some special thing in the future, I'm sure. But some people have speculated that those could have been 2 female Primarchs. It's an easy way to add them in.
So with you being someone who kind of is on the maybe less popular side of the only controversy that I, as a normie to Warhammer, am exposed to, which is the female Space Marines.
I wouldn't say I'm on the less popular side. I would just say I'm on one of the sides. There's a lot of people who don't care. And there's a lot of people who do care. The people who do care are very loud, is what I'll say. They're the ones who will go in the chats and try and like argue it to death.
Yeah, like I said, for me as a normie who doesn't really interact with the 40K community,
Yeah.
but I do interact with a lot of different like fandom people on social media. And so the only argument I ever see regarding 40K is the female Space Marines. So being a person who doesn't mind that concept, what to kind of play devil's advocate here, what kind of things, what changes to the lore would bother you in an adaptation, or what things are you concerned about, if anything, in either Henry Cavill leading the series or Amazon or someone? I don't. I have to look at the I think it was a woman. Yeah, Natalie Viscuso at
That's his
Vertigo.
girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
I think he's just thanking his girlfriend for being a part of, like, I don't know. Maybe she had some part of it too, but that's definitely who he's dating.
Because is he referring to Vertigo Comics, or is that a different company? I swear Vertigo is still under DC, the DC imprint right now. So I don't know unless Vertigo is like a miniatures company or something.
Let's see. Film producer and studio executive who recently joined Vertigo Entertainment. I mean, Vertigo Entertainment is a comic, right? Like a comic producer.
I mean, that's what I know it as.
American Film and Television Production Company. Maybe it's just something else. Oh, okay. What have they made, I wonder? The Ring, The Grudge, The Ring 2, The Departed. Hey.
It's interesting.
Oh, well, it says filmography for them. So what do they do then? Television. I mean,
they might just be like
company. Maybe they're part of these things, because it also says The Departed was Warner Brothers for the distributor. Oh.
I mean, they might just be one of those like more minor production companies that work on all those things.
You're probably right.
Maybe they were a lot smaller when the Departed came out, but they've grown over the years. Yeah,
Lego Movie. There's a lot of movies in here.
Huh.
Yeah, shit. Yeah, there's a ton of movies in there that they've been a part of. Big ones, too. So for me, when it comes to the so-called controversy, the easiest way is just be like, they've been there the whole time. We can't only take from men from these planets. We can also take from women. But here's the reason being, you could literally just be like, the changes that are done to these people are so vast that they take on masculine features, right? Like it's like if you give a woman crazy amounts of testosterone, they start to look like a man, right? Like it's the same thing. Like you're so far removed that you're just a big mound of muscle and like broad faces and backs. Like at that point, you couldn't tell the difference on most things. And they wear helmets 90% of the time for whatever scene you're doing. It really doesn't matter. You could get into like the training they go through beforehand and stuff, but it just depends on the chapter, on what their training is and all the other stuff. But other than that, I doubt they'll do anything that has to do with that.
So what kind of stuff?
Maybe GW will make a decision on that, but most of their hobbyists are male. Not saying that the women don't deserve like some kind of say and like, hey, if they want it, why does it matter? And the people who complain are not going to stop playing because now there's suddenly female Space Marines. And if they stop playing because of that get out of my hobby. I mean, really, you stop playing because someone else could play now with something. I mean, it's silly. But other than that, the only things that I would be worried that they would try to affect is, man, I mean, it's hard. If they go for a lighter tone, that might be a little weird. Like if they went for a comedic tone, you can go comedic.
Like an MCU, like an MCU movie.
Yeah, it couldn't be superhero. So one of the things people need to realize about the 40K universe is nobody is the good guy. No one is the good guy. Everyone
it could be like
is bad.
it could be a Zack Snyder superhero film, but not an MCU superhero film.
Pretty much, right? The best way to put it is like, as long as they're not like trying to convince people that the Imperium is good, or like, and I mean that happens anyways, because like a lot of the poster boys is for the game is Space Marines, but at the same time, like as long as they remind people that like even though these humans are fighting for their survival, they still are like extremely xenophobic, fascistic, and like murderous in all other ways, right? And have extremely backwards like thoughts. They literally murder people who have mutations from like pollution and stuff. Like they'll literally like round up and kill them.
I mean, assuming humanity is the protagonist, and likely Space Marines are going to be at least one of the groups of protagonists.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be like somewhat disingenuous not to show them as like the heroes of the story because you're looking at it from their point of view?
I mean, in the sense when you say heroes of the story, they win, they fight off bad guys in the sense of like let's say they're invaded or they go to a planet of humanity that's under siege. And yeah, you get to feel vindicated, like, yeah, we're killing the bad guys. The problem is everybody's the bad guy. And what I mean by that is they don't have to like hammer it in your face that these guys are not the good guys as well. But when the problem is like, as long as they're not trying to act like some of the things that the characters do in the 40K universe or that humanity does is justified. In fact, the lore on purpose tries to make you realize as much as possible that they are in the state they are because and like constantly have issues or problems happen because of their extreme xenophobia, right? They could ally with these races or another race against chaos, but they won't because they're extremely xenophobic, right? Or they won't do what's right when they need to and something bad happens. Or they're like the entire Imperium is also like this massively slow bureaucracy. It's like the grinding, like the worst thing of bureaucracy you could ever think of, and then like make it even slower. As everybody has like a role and everyone has to like fall in line. So it's like a soul crushing, like terrible life to live. And if that is properly put in, then you have the ability for people to break free from that chain, you know? That's when you could have heroes, people who don't follow the norm and don't allow the ecclesiarchy or whatever to like control how they think and how they act. Those are the stories that are good. Like the Space Marines who, like my favorite Space Marines are called Salamanders. And they are like the one Space Marine group that prioritize saving civilians over their own lives. Like they're the only one that really does it. Other Space Marines will like just, they see other humans as like in the way of their duty or as a subspecies, right? They look down on humans. Like Space Marines look down on humans in like a extreme way, similar to how the military sometimes looks at civilians, but like make it much, much worse because they're genetically different, right? They're like literally like mini, I've already used the word demigod, but they're basically like superhuman. It's the same thing with like heroes and like The Boys does a really good job of this, of like the dissociation that people with superpowers have compared to the populace.
So would you want a series that's basically like Starship Troopers, but without the comedic tone?
I wouldn't mind that.
In terms
Starship
of like,
that's a good way to put it. Starship Troopers. That because Starship Troopers
it has them. It's kind of like it's satirical, but it also all the protagonists kind of feed you the propaganda that they are the heroes and they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, I think as long as so the one one of the best ways, like the books do it, is you have existential threat, something extremely powerful, big army, whatever is going to destroy something. You have to stop it. Race against time, stop the bad guy. And in those stories, they just remind you here and there by like either characters having to make decisions that cost the lives of civilians, or they watch someone who is in a position of power choose to do those things instead of save them, and they're stuck following orders, things like that. Just reminders that like human lives cost almost nothing in the 40K universe. Like they will literally throw millions of people at an endeavor in like a meat shield. And that's,
isn't that kind of the point of the Dark Tide game? Is like these lowly humans.
You're just like
humans like working in the Hive City have to fight these low level enemies to continue their work for the Emperor, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. It's regular humans are just part of the meat grinder. So some of the stories of regular humans in the 40K universe can be very compelling. Sometimes skipping to Space Marines kind of loses out on that chance because they're just so different from human beings because they're just, they're like superhumans. But I think, and like there's even like the Imperial Guard, which is like the human army that fights as well as Space Marines, but the main forces of the human empire is the Imperial Guard, and they fight by numbers. They fight literally just by throwing more bodies at a fight, at a battle, because there's just so many planets with human beings on it, right? So like I said, there are ways to have extremely deep like conversations about morality and like why these characters do these things. And the books do a really good job. If the Horus Heresy books really make you question, like these characters feel like they're the good guys, but then they have to sit back every now and then and be like, but we're like a conquering imperialistic force. Are we really the good guys? And in this case, the human empire, if they're defending themselves, are maybe not bad, but they don't always defend themselves. Sometimes they go and destroy an Eldar craft world, or like, go and murder some other race's home. And they do that quite often. So my thing is not that they need to hammer it in your face like, oh, everybody's a bad guy. My thing is just like, I don't need people to put fascist like characters in the limelight and be like, well, this is okay what they do because they're the good guys, right? They're the protagonists, so it's okay when they do it.
Well, but because to me, when I see stuff like that, I don't think of it as like the writers are kind of co-signing this ideology. I simply look at it as these are the protagonists of their story. So it makes sense to kind of have the story fall in line with the ideology of the protagonist, not that this is something that the creators like are telling you
if you're
to believe in.
A story that puts them in a good light when they're doing things that are bad.
But is it a good light though, or is it just that the character?
You can write it to be. You can write the dialogue. You can write the scenes to try and justify their actions, or you can write it where you don't try and justify their actions and you let the people decide who are watching it. But you can write it to try and invoke a specific train of thought, or you're trying to write it in a way that you are influencing people's ideas about it.
Well, because the way I'm thinking about it is like, put it in like comic book terms. If somebody wrote like a limited series for like the Red Skull or Doctor Doom, from the protagonist's perspective, they are the hero, they are the good guy. But when I'm reading that, I don't read it as like, oh, the writer wants me to become a Nazi or to become like a follower of Doctor Doom. I just write it as they're correctly writing the villain as a villain.
Well, the difference is in those cases, those are villains that are villains. Also, they do evil things. And usually writers don't try to justify why they're doing the evil things.
But so right? if they accurately wrote Space Marines in a Warhammer series, wouldn't they write them in that same kind of way to where they in their dialogue with each other and in their monologues or whatever, they believe they are the heroes and they are kind of justifying their actions to themselves, but it's not necessarily the writer justifying their actions to you as the audience.
Well, every time you put any dialogue in or put anything in anything, there's a reason why you're doing it. It's like whenever you watch a movie and you're like, why'd they just put that random object there? I bet it'll have significance in the future. So
but if you're adapting a story that's already written, like 40K, wouldn't it make sense to write the Space Marines as having a fascist ideology and presenting it as something that's justified from the protagonist?
So what I'm saying is you do have them have that ideology. What you don't do is you don't justify it. So I'm not saying change the way they act. I'm saying when they do their actions, you need to show what the effects are. You see what I'm saying? Like if you have them say the things and then have them always win and be the good guys, right? Or, in the sense that like most of the time it's not that they're the good guys, they're just the story's protagonist, which doesn't mean you're a good guy. Protagonist does not mean good guy.
Exactly. So in that way that you just described it, wouldn't like presenting them as always the winners and quote unquote the good guys, we as the audience would still see from their actions that they're not doing something right. So I guess from my point of view, I'm not really sure what you mean by the creators like justifying those actions.
So what I mean by that is if all you have them do is win a fight against bad guys, right? No collateral damage, no and I mean those stories are fine too. Like sometimes it's fun to just watch superhumans kill creatures or demons and stuff, and that can feel very vindicating. You don't always have to hammer someone in the head with ethics. But what I mean by that isn't that they act different. They should act the same. I'm not wanting them to be different characters. I want to make sure that if they make those characters, the way that you design like what they do, and all it takes is little reminders, right? Like when they should say things that just sound off, and you shouldn't just play it off like that's normal. Like other people sometimes, even other Space Marines, aren't necessarily of those ideologies.
Okay, let me put it.
They're like, oh wait, that's a little fucked up.
All right, so let me put it this way then. If you're let's say you're I don't know, let's say if there's like I'm not saying there is, but if there's like a shorter book and they decide to adapt that book into a season of a TV show, if they pick out specific chapters or specific lines of dialogue, are you wanting them to change any of the writing? Like not necessarily.
No, I don't want to
not so far as in like they're changing the story, but like what you're saying right now, to where you want it to be shown that they're even when they are the protagonists, that they're not necessarily doing the right thing. And
I mean that's
the way
you're
describing it for a TV show. So, but if I'm assuming is that's the way that it's written though in the books.
In the books, most books make you they let you know they're not the good guys.
So what you're saying is that you wouldn't want any changes to that aspect of it.
Oh, that yeah.
From the books to the
if there
show.
was a part of 40K I wouldn't want them to change is the fact that 40K is a satire. It is not a funny satire. It is a satire, and satire can be different views. It's just like a distorted view of something. And in fact, GW, speaking of this, all of this comes also from the fact that there have been literal Nazis who have played 40K and gone to tournaments, and they see the Imperium and parts, and that GW literally had to put out a statement like, we're like, if you're going to wear and be a like literal Nazi at one of our tournaments, like we don't condone this. And 40K is not like the things that happen in 40K is a satire. They put out a whole statement to be like, hey guys, like when we create this story of the Imperium and the Emperor, like all these things are extremely fascist and are not a good thing. Like we are not saying the Space Marines and the Imperium are good guys. We're simply creating a universe where you can play war on war on war on war, right? Because if you have good guys don't always want to fight, right? Eventually they want peace. But in a terrible universe like this, where like there's hyper xenophobic, there's always a bad guy around every corner, that because you create them literally by your own oppression. Like a lot of corruption from chaos comes from the Imperium being absolutely terrible to the humans, right? To their own people, and those people look for an outlet or a way to like upheave the terribleness of the ecclesiarchy or the Imperium, but they turn to evil chaos gods because those are the ones who whisper in their ear, right? So they don't need to change anything. If they follow the way the books and the writing is designed, it'll be fine. And I don't think they won't. I think Henry Cavill completely understands like that as a concept.
That's all I was trying to get at. Like, because when we first started talking about that, I thought you meant like you wanted them to change the source material in a way to kind of alter the way that the audience would see the story and the characters.
Oh no, the source material itself is designed that way, and some people misinterpret it. Like I said, there are literal people who see the Empire as like a good thing, and they rally behind that like idea of following this basically warrior king, fascist dictator god. In this case, the god emperor. He's like the ultimate version of a fascist dictator. He's literally a god being. I mean, I don't think that as a good thing, right?
I don't think they're misinterpreting it if they actually agree with that ideology.
Well, you're right. They're not seeing that it's a satire. That is not a good thing. That's the difference. But yeah, no, if they follow it the way it's written, it'll be great. I mean, it has so many possibilities for literally any type of story, from the lowliest person story to a Space Marine fighting story to a like Primarch who's in control of multiple armies story. You can have like you could have bad guy stories, right? You could play off because like they're the other Chaos Marines, like Space Marines, but they're Chaos corrupted. You could do their stories. You could do Eldar stories, like you could do the elves. They have an extremely elaborate history. You could do the Tau, which are like had Japanese kind of like I think they're literal what is it? For the greater good is their like catchphrase. So they're like slightly nicer guys than the rest of the universe, but they're still like control their populace with mind control devices. But we won't get into that. Again, nobody's the hero. Nobody's the good guy in 40K. And they do that on purpose so that there's no like debate, right? Like everyone fights everyone and nobody fights together to fight chaos, which they should, because chaos literally wants to destroy the entire universe and basically control it all. But Yeah, I think it'd be fine. The Henry Cavill loves the game. Obviously likes to stick to source material as he's his own decisions in his business career right now are being affected by. But yeah, I think they could do crazy cool stories. I'm the main thing I'm excited about is this universe being shown on a major streaming device like Amazon Prime. Because I'm not always the biggest fan of GW, the creators of 40K, when it comes to like business practices and stuff, but that usually has to do with like prices and other things they do. Because the tabletop is extremely expensive. But they, with that gigantic influence, they can create more content for 40K. Maybe eventually make content for Age of Sigmar, the fantasy stuff, which I would love. But the fact that more people watching it means more people buying it, more games, more, like things just come out more. And it's for something that just is like I love so much. I think that's just good for the hobby. It also brings it to like, whenever these things get big, people start to lose some of that stigma, right? So if people think it's weird or like too nerdy to play on a tabletop, right? After they've watched and played a bunch of Warhammer like games, it won't seem so weird because you'll be like, oh, so this is where it came from. I mean, this seems really cool. Maybe I'll read a book, and and that's how they get people, right? You do one little bit of the media, then you get into another bit of the media, and it just kind of, it gets you eventually. You maybe never touch the models, but like the other stuff still makes money and eventually affects the models. So.
I mean, honestly, I think we're past the point where people are like afraid to engage in nerdy hobbies. Because I mean, we've had
You're not wrong.
We've had the MCU for over a decade, the DCU. We've had they're doing a Dungeons and Dragons film.
Yep.
They did Amazon like animated. I think it was it Dungeons and Dragons? It was like Vox Machina or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's Dungeons and Dragons. So they've done,
and they got Star Wars and everything. Like I think, like you might get more people playing the tabletop game, but I'm not sure that there's like a large amount of people that are like afraid of being seen as nerdy.
There's still people out there. I mean, like anytime I try to explain someone what the models are in my house, if they come to my house and they're like, what are these painted toys? It's always a weird conversation because they just kind of don't get it. But other than that, I'm extremely ecstatic that nowadays there's not that stigma that there was when I was a kid for a lot of nerdy stuff. Like, I mean, I grew up in an area where like you talked about playing video games and they thought you were nerdy. Like, and that one was weird to me because I knew a bunch of the like football players who played video games just like I did, but they just wouldn't admit it to the other people, right? But I mean, I grew up playing like D&D and video games and reading extremely like nerdy fantasy books and comics. So that's not necessarily like, and I grew up in a very southern small town. So like I had a much like more insulated version of that, but it is definitely different. It is very different. The things that we got made fun of, or I got made fun of in high school, are the things that like it's cool to do now. People wear, like if I wore a comic book t-shirt, people be like, oh, okay. Or if I wore an anime t-shirt, definitely be like, what's that? What's that? And nowadays people be like, oh, just, oh, you got a My Hero t-shirt? Oh, look, it's Deku,
I think there's still a limit because like there's I think it was on like, I think it was off the Air Force Base. There was a guy who always drove around with a big like Itachi sticker on his car.
Yeah, he had the,
and I was
like,
like,
cloak,
okay,
right?
like it's one thing to wear a shirt, but to drive around on base is a little bit goofy.
He just embracing it, man. He's embracing the nerd. It's all right. I've seen your comics and your your comic stands.
Yeah, I don't mind. I don't hide that. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about this.
I know, right? We all, I mean, it's the best way I see it is like when people get really, really, really into their cars and they soup them up and they paint them up. Speaking of cars, right? Like they get real, real nerdy and into that thing. So sometimes people's like hobbies really, really, I mean, they get into them, and I'm just happy that there's less overall like stigma on what your hobbies can be, especially when it comes to being a male. I think that was one of the big things. Like a lot of women could be more into things that were slightly nerdier or, you know, just different. But men have for a long time always had the issue with like, is it manly to like this thing? You know, we're constantly asking this weird question that has nothing to do with our hobbies. Is it cool? Is it manly to play video games? Like, what does it have to do with it? It doesn't. But after we stop asking that dumb question, I think it's good because people we get cool shit like Witcher, right, on Netflix. We get cool TV shows of stuff that we never thought we would see. The fact that Game of Thrones became such a phenomena was something that blew my mind because it was this fantasy, like dark, freaking like obviously nerdy thing normally, but it just grew. And all those same people who like would talk crap or like treat you different when you were in high school were the same people watching Game of Thrones, like to the end and to every season. Right. So it's crazy to me how much it's changed, but at the same time, it's great because now people can enjoy their hobbies in more than one medium than a book. I think that's the main thing because books have always been there. Comic books, maybe some games here and there. So video games have always been kind of nerdy. So sometimes you have video games, but like now we have like TV shows, like legit TV shows on stuff. We have more video games. And then you have like YouTube channels from people watching, reacting. You got people like creating their own fan stuff versions. Like I think it's all good. It brings more exposure, more people enjoying a hobby.
Well, I'd say the one negative to kind of the mass market appeal of nerdy hobbies, which leads to my one concern about the Warhammer cinematic universe, is especially since it's going to Amazon, is that my first ever like really nerdy kind of thing was Lord of the Rings, which I got into when I was a little kid. I fucking love Lord of the Rings. I've loved it for decades. And I don't know if you watched the Rings of Power series on Amazon.
Yeah, that's all right.
I don't want to spoil it, but yeah. No, so I made review videos on it. I first was kind of indifferent towards it because it was kind of slow and it took a while to hit any pace. And I still think it has a lot of like plot issues, but it really fucking pissed me off because they, in a lot of ways, just directly they didn't just ignore the lore, but they like directly contradicted the lore. And there's actually like a line in what Henry Cavill said that reads almost word for word from like a couple lines from a number of interviews given by the Rings of Power showrunners, where he says, "I promise to bring you something familiar, and I endeavor to bring you something fantastic that is as of yet unseen." And so what Rings of Power...
That's someone saying, I'm going to take liberties with it.
Yeah. So what Rings of Power did is they did explore like new regions of Middle Earth and new people, which was fine. Like, well, fine as in like they did the Southland story, which I couldn't care less about. Like that one was fine because it's like you're not fucking with the lore with that storyline. But with the other three storylines, they did. Like they were introducing Gandalf in the Hobbit storyline, which he doesn't show up during that time period. They had Galadriel go to Numenor, and Numenor she doesn't.
Wait.
Gandalf was in the Rings of Power.
Oh yeah.
He in the fuck, what were they called? Whatever the Hobbit. They're one of the three versions of Hobbits that was in the show, and at the end, it's pretty obvious that the stranger was Gandalf, and he doesn't show up. He doesn't show up until like the beginning of the Third Age, and this is like they fucked with the timeline too. So they heavily compressed the timeline. So I don't know exactly where this is supposed to take place, but it seems like it's like the middle to the end of the Second Age. But they introduced Gandalf. They had Galadriel go to Numenor, which never happened. They had the stuff that was happening in Numenor didn't happen during the time period that everything else was taking place. The characters wouldn't have been around at the time that everything was taking place. The stuff with the elves and dwarves where they made Mithril like this light-bearing sacred object that was going to save the elves. It's just a stupid fucking plot point that makes no sense. And then, which I could tell right away that they were going to have them discover Mithril because they introduced Durin the Third, which was the king, and he was the king who discovered Mithril in the books. But then, so that was fine. It's the part where they said this is like some sacred rock, and in this rock is like this light that's going to save all the elves from this mysterious like blackness that's going to appear out of nowhere. And it's like, that's fucking stupid. It has nothing to do with anything that Tolkien wrote. Like there is a light of the elves, but their light fading was a natural process due to the phases of the world and the fact that they needed to return to the West.
Yeah,
there was never any like stupid sacred stone that they needed to distill into an object. And it's like, as soon as they started introducing that plot, I was like, okay, they're definitely going to use the Mithril to make some of the rings. But then also that part where they did Halbrand as Sauron is like they put no fucking like subtlety. Like if you're a fan and you know the lore, they put zero subtlety into revealing that Halbrand was Sauron from nearly the beginning. Like they introduced little pieces of dialogue that he'd say things like
he would just say like really not cryptic and very obvious bad guy things.
Like when he got captured in Numenor and he was in the prison and Ar-Pharazôn came in and he was talking to him. He literally says a line where he's like, "I advise you not to do that." And as soon as that happened, me and a bunch of other YouTubers went on, and it's like, that's literally like you're talking about Sauron when he was captured by Ar-Pharazôn in the books, and he became, after like a century of pretending to be weak and be like supplicant to Ar-Pharazôn, that he basically started advising him, and that's when he turned evil. And it's like, and this kind of like semi like flirty thing with Galadriel. Like, are you serious? Like Sauron's trying to like flirt with Galadriel to like trick her. Like that's all. This was really dumb. And my worry with this series is that they're going to take the same liberty. Like, again, I don't have any personal like emotional investment in Warhammer, but like on principle, since I know they've done I know that a lot of like franchises that have made changes in their live action adaptations that I didn't like. And I know Amazon specifically just made the Rings of Power. And again, they made a lot of lore changes that I hated.
Well, here's the thing about 40K. There's established lore, but the established lore is not like the same. The best way to put it is most of the lore that happens in 40K is books of separate stories of people writing in this part of the galaxy, this happens, in this part, this happens. None of it is like usually, I mean, there are some that like advance the storyline, but most of them could happen at any point during the timeline and you would have no idea. In fact, one of the things about the timeline is that the warp literally will cause people to travel sometimes like hundreds of years later and not even know that they literally just, like, to them it was a day, and now suddenly it's 200 years later because the warp messes with time. But in this sense, it's going to be very, very hard to have a established lore to mess up because it's so open-ended, and it's kind of designed open-ended because it's a game where they want players to make up their own stuff, right? They want you to make up your own Space Marine chapter. They want you to make up like stories because this galaxy is so large.
Well, like the quote unquote like modern time is open ended, but isn't the history still the history though?
It is open because there's just so many battles that happen. There's just so many battles that happen that you could create one and it wouldn't. I mean, there are certain battles that are like big ones that happen. I mean, like the Siege of Terra would be like a big one. So like if you go backwards in time, yes, there's a little bit more established lore because it's the past. But even then you can create stories that happened at the same time in parallel time periods that are just at a different place in the galaxy because it's just so big.
They should do an anthology series, an anthology TV series, and call it Tales from the Warp.
Tales from the Warp. Oh, I would love that actually. Tales from the Warp, like Tales from the Crypt. I would love it because they could do a lot of things. That's the thing that I'm excited about, but also is like, there's going to be people who aren't happy because it's not going to be what they thought they should have done. But it's so big, it's hard to make that decision. It's hard to make a decision on where to start. So wherever they start should be fine. I mean, it should just be like, okay, this is our first live action. Let's see what they create. They don't have to like develop well, here's Iron Man. Now here's the Hulk. You know, they don't have to do piece by piece to create the cinematic universe.
Well, I think that could be one of the problems is that, you know, if they try to go too big too fast with so many different, like trying to tell like a large range of stories in that universe, that they may lose the kind of like what would I try to say, like continuity control.
Oh yeah, I mean it's
you may lose kind of the integrity of the lore and the stories if you start making too many things. And I don't know how much control Henry Cavill is actually going to have over the cinematic universe, but if they start making like 4 shows, he's probably going to oversee like Kevin Feige with the MCU. I seriously doubt he has as much control over it now as he did because they're pumping out like 4 movies a year and like 3 Disney Plus series. And I would say, I think that it'll ever be that. I mean, I hope one day maybe. I mean, I don't see why not.
Well, the difference is Disney got that money.
Well, Amazon has money. I mean, they just pumped they made the most expensive TV series in history with the Rings of Power. So.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I bet that Amazon will choose this first show as a test. They'll probably see how people react, and then they'll go from there. If I were a betting man, that's what I think would happen. But eventually, maybe there'll be a bunch of different shows. And he said cinematic universe. So in his thing. So maybe, they're planning multiple, which is good. I mean, they could plan. The thing is it's so big that you could create a multitude of shows that have nothing to do with each other, except that they're in the same universe. Or you could create slightly together, you know, and build upon maybe a big event that's coming. But like in the 40K universe, there's always another big event. You know, there's not like an infinite Crisis, or Infinity Gauntlet thing, right? There's no big thing that's coming that is like world ending, because everything's world ending or universe. Like everything's always in trouble all the time. But yeah.
Well, I think we should probably end the video soon because we've been going on an hour and a half. And I think people have probably, when they watch the video, they're probably going to tune out by this point. But my last question. Oh, yeah.
I'm sure they tuned out on my lore talking a long time.
My last question would be if you were in control of the Warhammer cinematic universe, what would be your first project?
My first project, and if it was 40K, not 30K, and I was sticking to, because that makes it hard. That makes it really hard when you say.
Well, let's say you could do whatever you want then. Let's say you can do 30K or 40K, because if with my limited knowledge, I would go back to the like I said earlier, the beginning with the rise of the Emperor as a starting off point.
I kind of think
you could do like an origin, like a deep lore kind of origin start off to the series, like with the Rings of Power. The one thing that they kind of did right is they did in the first episode, they did that kind of like prologue that the Lord of the Rings films did, where they kind of set up like the backdrop to the world and like the powers and all that kind of stuff. They could like, I would as a new, like a normie fan to Warhammer, I think I would want to see like a foundation built where I can kind of understand the beginning of the Imperium and then make whatever series you want.
So I actually do the opposite. And here's the reason why. I would create, probably the first thing I would do is a story that most people could watch and not get lost in the lore. So I would probably do something like Eisenhorn, or a detective story, or like a human being doing something in a hive city, finding out some chaos or something bad guy, something like that. And then I would do something larger, probably like a Space Marine based thing. And it would most likely be against like chaos or something else, because those are the biggest like themes of 40K, is chaos versus humanity. But I would create these backdrops so that you could see, especially the humans living in the crap that is the 40K universe, so that when I do go back and show humanity at their golden age, because that's what it basically is like during the Great Crusade, they had like technology that they don't have anymore in the 40K, because it's literally like been lost over 10,000 years. And there was this like this everything was about science. Everything was about like the imperial truth, which is the idea that there are no gods. And so like you go back to this time when everything has hope, and you basically get that like contrast. You get to see like the end effect of all of the things that they're trying to do going wrong, and then like all the bad things. And then you go back to a time where then you get to feel like almost melancholy, right? Because you see this very like hopeful race trying to, even though they're like being imperialistic and there's, other bad things, like trying to be a better rate. Like they're trying to be better. Like they're trying to be better human beings. They are focused on progress. And it's one of the big like driving forces in the books for the Horus Heresy, like on logic and reason and science. In the 40K universe, everything is like paranoia. It's faith, right? Do what you're told. Believe in the Emperor. Like a intelligent mind, or a mind that wanders, is like a bad one that thinks too much, right? One that's not obedient is bad. That's like the 40K universe, as opposed to the 30K, where humanity is like trying to create new wonders. They're trying to reconquer and like unite their old worlds, and be a better like be better in some way. You know, I mean, they're still imperialistic. But like going back and you just get this like viewpoint of, oh God, I know this is going to end bad. And that's actually a good feeling. Like I think that's a good writing tool is when people go and they watch it and they're like, oh wow, this I know ends badly. But I mean, you could also argue that people who've never watched but played 40K or don't know anything about the lore could be surprised by the betrayal and everything. So, you know, it just depends. I would definitely probably start with 40K though.
Would you start off with Tales from the Warp? do you like an anthology series, kind of set the seeds for different storylines, and then depending on how fans react, that's how you branch off. That's how you branch off into other seasons.
I mean, to the very what's the way to put it? The like the Love, Death, and Robots is a good example of like people like that kind of thing where because you just come into short stories and then you can walk away if you want and then come back later. It doesn't like steal you into the show, which is also good because then you get people to watch more. But like you can expose them to multiple versions of the lore, like places in the lore.
And it would fit in line with the kind of the tone of like dark and hopelessness where like each episode ends with like it's just getting shittier. And that's just where the episode ends.
Yeah, it's like Black Mirror or whatever. I mean, that's basically 40K though. I mean, every episode usually should end with something where you go, okay, shit. They do that really well. Actually, 40K, the Warhammer Plus app has basically what we're talking about already, but in animated form. They have what's called Hammer and Bolter. And it's just short stories with different artwork of different places in the 40K universe. And it's really good. I like them. But yeah, I would start with 40K and then maybe go to the 30K universe. Depends on how much I would have to build for the 40K. But the 30K stuff it's boring for anyone who doesn't want to learn about humanity and their stuff, because the 30K universe is basically just humanity and like what happens between them, as opposed to the 40K, which has orcs, Tyranids, Eldar, Tau, Chaos, like all these other things that like other players, especially other players in the 40K who love playing these other armies and stuff. Now, you know, like when you go to 30K, all they get to do is be a space, like they, you know, it's only Space Marines and other Space Marines fighting Space Marines, right? It's just humanity versus itself. But yeah, that's the only thing. It can be a little boring with it being humans against humans in that case. But the stories in the Horus Heresy are extremely, what's the word? Extremely, God, I can't think of a good adjective, but they're good. They're very good. They're designed for you to kind of like just watch as humanity loses this chance to be great, right? It's just like it's in the tip of their fingers and then it falls apart, and it's very it's a very good writing tool. Like that kind of story is very heart-wrenching because you're just like, dang it. Oh, these like this one hero character that I'm rooting for in this book. If only, right? But yeah.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end it. I appreciate the enormous lore dump that you've added to this video. If anybody is still around at this point, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to see me bring back live streams and maybe have Grant on and talk about more topics, could probably talk about Warhammer again in the future.
Yeah, whenever they make the show.
Yeah, it'll probably be a few years from now, but
yeah.
So I've got plenty of time to learn about Warhammer. But yeah, if you want to see live streams, if you want to see me cover Warhammer content, I could, try to learn it and then make videos as I go. So yeah, put those in the comment section and hope you all have a great day.
Boy.